Varvara Petrovna hired Stepan Tropinovich as tutor for her son, Nikolai Stravogin. As Nikolai is one of the crucial and very ambiguous characters in the book, it is important to take a deep dive into his background and character. Stravogin, as I will call him, was the only son of Varvara and Lieutenant General Nikolai Stravogin. We are not told much about the marriage. It didn't last. The general was connected to nobility. Given what we know about Varvara's thirst for social acceptance, she probably married him to climb socially. Her husband was her connection to high society. Varvara herself was the only daughter of a very rich tax farmer, not a noble. So he needed money, which she had. She wanted connections, which he had. What could go wrong? Varvara and the general separated because of a dissimilarity in their characters, and the general died 4 years after the separation. By the time of his death, Varvara had hired Stepan Tropinovich, who would become her new connection to society and her bosom friend. Varvara did not much have to do with her son Nikolai. Stepan Tropinovich was his main teacher. We do not find out a ton about how Stepan educated Nikolai Stravogin. Near the end of Part 2, Chapter 2, entitled Prince Harry Matchmaking, we find out the following. Stepan Tropinovich managed to touch the deepest strings in his friend's heart and to call forth in him the first, still uncertain sensation of that age-old sacred anguish which the chosen soul, having once tasted and known it, will never exchange for any cheap satisfaction. This is a crucial aspect of Stravogin's character. He has a deep conscience. He worries about whether he has done right. He longs for the good. Without a belief in the absolute good, his longing cannot be fulfilled. This does not mean that he never pursues cheap satisfactions. He does. But it does call into question whether or not such cheap satisfactions would be genuinely satisfying for him. He loves the high, or at least respects it, and worries that he's fallen short of it. Our narrator calls him a lover of anguish. He is a person who finds the search for deep meaning in his life itself to be a reason for life. A healthy society would probably point a character like Stravogin in a healthy direction. This is modernizing Russia, however. We hear a lot about Stravogin's story in Part 1 of Demons, but we do not hear the whole of this story. And we're going to confine ourselves to what we learn in Part 1 right now. We will get a different angle on it, a deeper one, when we complete Part 2. After Stravogin grew up, his mother sent him to Petersburg for university. This even though Varvara had such a bad experience with her magazine in Petersburg. After completing his studies, he entered military service. And I think as a general rule for Dostoevsky, when someone enters military service, his character will become corrupt. So it was for Stravogin. He started leading a wild life, we learn. A life of, quote, savage unbridledness, end quote, and, quote, beastly behavior, end quote. We don't hear of all the details, trust me. Eventually, Stravogin fought 2 duels and was entirely blamed for both of them. He killed one man and crippled another. He was sent to serve in a remote part of Russia, and even then only by a favor from one of his father's friends. Rumors about his shenanigans got back to his hometown, but Stepan explains that Stravogin is merely a Prince Harry type from Shakespeare's Henry IV, who sows his wild oats before he settles down to a life of respectability. Stepan's idea is that Stravogin is a run-of-the-mill story of growing up after pleasure-seeking, and this will not turn out to be the case. In 1863, Stravogin did some valiant service and was promoted, and then suddenly retired and returned home. He was then about 25 years old. The town was divided about the young man. Some people hated him to the point of blood vengeance, while others were fascinated by him, thinking that some fatal mystery existed in his soul. He was handsome and reasonable, but his character was a little contradictory. He was surprisingly modest, and at the same time bold and confident like no one else among us. He is the very image of beauty, and at the same time repulsive. It was said that his face suggested a mask. In any event, upon his return home, he causes several scandals. He pulls the nose of an old man in the officers' club, and he thereby insults old society. He gets a little fresh with the wife of one of the town's liberals, Liputin, and he is called in to speak to the mild governor about his misdeeds, and while telling the governor the secrets for why he had done such unbridled acts, he bites the governor's ear and will not let go. The governor has the boy arrested. He has offended the liberals too. But Stravogin gets off. It turns out that he had an acute brain fever when he acted so crazy, and several doctors confirm it. Not everyone in the town is convinced of this. What is brain fever? I would submit in this case, brain fever is the return of that deep-seated anguish about not doing right, a conflict between his conscience and his memory. And in this case, his conscience and makes him do crazy things. It is a genuine sickness and a very human one. He no longer seems to love doing bad things as he had done before after the brain fever. And this marks the end of the first part of his character, I would say. What is he to do about the sickness? No one at the time thinks of calling in a priest or anything like that. Instead, Stravogin is sent abroad, as we see in Part 1, Chapter 2, Section 4. Here is one of those great modern lies. All the boy needs is a change of scenery. But we find out that when he travels abroad, he takes some of the problems with him, and the anguish and the conflict do not disappear. They find new outlets, and these outlets are politics and love. The importance of the love interest predominates Part 1 of Demons. His love interest is Liza, the only daughter of Varvara's old frenemy, and a respectable family from their neck of the woods. Stravogin had met the family in Paris, and he accompanied them to Switzerland. Varvara goes visiting the family in Switzerland and comes back thinking that Liza and Stravogin will be a married match in no time. Liza would be a perfect mate from Varvara's point of view. She was rich and connected through family ties to the new governor of the province, the von Lempkes. Then in section 6, our narrator tells us that the chronicle really begins. And this real beginning starts with Nikolai Stravogin and Liza breaking up. It seems that Liza could not get Stravogin to commit, so she started cozying up to another man in order to make him jealous, an old trick. Stravogin didn't seem to care, and he had been spending time with Darya Pavlovna, Varya's freed serf, and now humble servant. In any event, Nikolai Stravogin seems to get sick of the whole situation and leaves Switzerland for Petersburg. And he goes away with a certain count who has 3 daughters of marriageable age. Darya has some of the characteristics of being pregnant. When Darya or Dasha comes back from Switzerland, she somehow looks tired. Dasha is being hidden as well. Varvara immediately decides that Dasha should marry Stepan Trofimovich. Rumors around town suggest that the young lady is pregnant. Stepan Trofimovich himself worries that he's being made to marry someone else's sins. As Stepan Trofimovich says, Varvara is motivated by, quote, a desperate wish to paint over the aristocratic peccadillos of her priceless Nicholas by marriage with an honorable man. There are rumors also, more or less well established, that Stravogin had an affair with Shatov's wife. We will see later that there was a vague but trustworthy rumor among us that Shatov's wife had for some time had a liaison with Nikolai Stravogin. And again, there are rumors, and these rumors will be confirmed later, that Stravogin is actually married to a lame girl and a woman of questionable sanity. This is the second phase of Stravogin's development. He seems to be a pleasure seeker, the first part of Prince Harry's character. But it is not the last part. Stravogin prepares to come home, and we come home, our narrator sees him and says this: I don't know why he impressed me at once as absolutely incontestably beautiful, so that no one could have said that his face was a mask. No more mask. He is a changed man when he comes back from Switzerland. Precisely what that change is, we will investigate in later videos. At the same time, we learn that Nikolai Stravogin has connections with many of these strange new characters, people with decidedly non-Russian views that are converging on the town. He knows Kirillov, a nihilistic engineer. Nikolai Stravogin knows Pyotr Stepanovich, who is rumored to be a member of the socialist revolutionaries. Stravogin is on intimate terms with Shatov. All of these more or less political men on both sides of the revolutionary divide are at least acquainted with Stravogin. This is all we know through the first part of the book. Precisely why all the political men are familiar with Stravogin is something we must also discover, and our next videos will treat that matter. So Stravogin emerges from the first part of the book as a conscience-stricken man who has enjoyed doing wrong and who has been something of a skirt chaser. And we see that he's married to Marya, the lame girl. When we first meet the lame girl, she is delirious, and she talks about having a child and then killing it. Perhaps this is just a dream or a delusion, but we will need to explain why precisely that marriage happened. Let us suffice to say that our Stravogin is a very mysterious character, and the mysteriousness seems to be much more related to his spiritual anguish. He has tried to rid himself of that anguish with raucous actions and pleasure-seeking, and perhaps political action. Nothing seems to have worked. Our next video concerns the confusing situation that arises when this conscience-stricken man arrives back home.